also, YouLesson is that app through which you can maximize on your ability to study online. You don't need a teacher or a parent to be in your midst. All you need is the data in that regard, and you can proceed with your continued learning online. So ITEL, YouLesson app, and also Minute Maid, those are our sponsors. Please look out for their services today, tomorrow, any other day in that regard. In my midst is Kukunda Kwe. Yes, Rebecca. She is a gender specialist working for the Private Sector Foundation Uganda, ahead of the private sector dialogue tomorrow. Would like to talk about what should be expected during that encounter tomorrow at Hotel Africana. Would like to talk about gender-based violence at the workplace. 1 in 3 women are actually affected by gender-based violence, and we also do know that 35% of our women all over the globe have suffered some kind of intimate partner violence or non-partner violence in that regard. We also do know that 38% of our women globally, yes, when it comes to the murders, many are actually owed to intimate partners. 38% of the murders orchestrated all over the world are actually orchestrated by intimate partners in that regard. But largely, would like to talk about gender-based violence in the workplace. Kukunda Kwe is telling me that even the men are nowadays affected, just like the women. That's how debilitating the situation is. Okay, let's unpack this conversation. Good morning, Rebecca.
Good morning. Thank you.
All right, during this preamble, you are telling me now the men are as affected when it comes to GBV in the workplace, just like the women. Bring us up to speed with the latest statistics.
Yeah, thank you so much, and good morning, our viewers. So we're talking about gender-based violence, which refers to different forms of harm inflicted on one by virtue of being male or female. And we know that there are different forms of gender-based violence. It could be physical, the battering, it could be sexual, issues of rape, defilement, female genital mutilation, sexual assault that is consensual and is happening a lot in the workplace. But it could also be emotional by the type of word someone uses, the type of symbols they put before you, and we see all the isolation and so on.
Assigning the man and no assignments to the woman.
Okay, partly part of that, and we are saying that this is happening in our workplaces. I think gone are the days when you used to know gender-based violence as something of the rural areas. What we see now is that it's a global pandemic happening from the grassroots to the boardrooms.
So if she's not succumbing to your whims as the boss or the team leader, not going to be assigning her any work. This has been happening.
Exactly, and so as Private Sector Foundation Uganda, we are here to speak about this vice, and also we are rallying our private sector entities to speak about this vice, to continuously sensitize our workers, our employees, even the managers, that gender-based violence is real in the workplace. And that it actually has negative effects on your productivity. It has negative effect on performance of your staff. It has negative effect on the emotional well-being of the people you're working with. And when all these twinning together, they have an effect, a negative effect on your profitability as a company. So being an apex body for private sector entities in Uganda, together with the development partners, the UN agencies, and the Spotlight Initiative, we are here to let companies know that it's time to take action. It's not time to say, this does not concern me. How does this relate to production if I'm in manufacturing? How does this relate to agriculture if I'm on the farm? But we are saying that it is a human issue, it is a social issue that has a business sense that we need to address. And
of course, for the women, it largely takes flight away from the, maybe let's say a newsroom, let's say maybe a company's, you know, official cover, and it goes all the way to the internet.
Exactly.
Women are being abused on the internet. Let's say a female journalist is trying to disseminate information using the platform on the internet. People will stop looking at what she's disseminating and they focus
looking at their body. Exactly.
Yes, and they make all these funny comments. Talk to me about online sexual harassment.
That's real, especially as we get more into digitalization. I think when you follow some of the feminists that are really trying to speak about these issues online, they are being attacked, and we think it's not right. And as we talk about gender-based violence in workplaces, because for someone who is a blogger, the online place is your workplace. So we call upon the public, we call upon the men to really stop this vice, and also to say that our would like to emphasize the fact that gender-based violence is not just a women's issue. As Private Sector Foundation Uganda and with private sector entities recognize that it's affecting both male and female. Of course, statistically, it affects more females, like you've clearly put it at the beginning, but it affects both. So what we're also trying to ask private sector companies is to put in place policies and guidelines that can actually make gender-based violence a risk venture in the workplace. And we're just not talking about policies, we're asking for an emotional connection with the policies. Don't just make a policy because someone has asked you to do it. Make a policy and have it implemented. Connect the fact that the employee being abused now could be your wife or your husband, your brother or your sister, or even your daughter or son. And by doing that, we know that companies will get more responsive.
I see.
Yeah,
Based on your submission, we now know how women are affected as far as GBV is concerned. But what about the men? How are they affected? So
for the men, really, it comes on in different ways.
I see.
More or less similar to the women, but of course the difference is in the magnitude.
How so?
It comes in terms of the words, the expressions that could be given to the male colleagues. As talking to one of the male managers in one of the corporate companies, and he demonstrated an example of where you think someone really gets so seductive in your office all the time.
I see.
And you know, when we're dealing with such issues, we talk about the key strategies to use. Keep your door open, or express yourself that I'm actually uncomfortable with your behavior. But also we're asking private companies to put in place redress mechanisms, reporting mechanisms. There are 3 areas: recognize, report, and respond. So even for the male that are affected by gender-based violence in the workplaces, we ask them, we ask you gentlemen out there not to die in hunger, but actually report. And for the private sector companies, what we're talking about are safe and responsive response mechanisms. Because we know you're dealing with the male gender, there are lots of egos. Oh my God, how am I going to even speak out that I've been sexually harassed, as an example? So by having in place responsive mechanisms, reporting mechanisms that are safe from harassment, because you could go to report and end up being harassed again. By having in place mechanisms that protect the identity, we believe that this vice will be addressed in the private sector.
As profit-making entities, why should private companies even bother to address this issue of gender-based violence?
Exactly,
Rebecca?
yeah. So like we see it being a social evil, it has an effect on general human behavior. Like I said, it affects one's concentration on the workplace. It affects issues of productivity. If you're running a factory and you have this staff that's being abused emotionally by the superiors, they could break your machine. Then some companies put in measures and say, I'll make them pay, but how many staff will you make them really repair these machines? So it has emotional strain. It affects one's performance. We also see rising cases of absenteeism as a result of, let's say, psychosocial issues coming out of gender-based violence. Because
you're dealing with a toxic work culture.
Toxic work culture, and you're like, it's this morning, I don't even think of going to this workplace.
I see.
So if that is happening for a profit-making entity, it is going to have an effect on your productivity levels. It's definitely going to have an effect on your profitability at the end of it all. And what we are trying to do as for example, we have the program called the Gender Equality Seal Certification Program. We're also trying to make a business case for gender. Why should companies be interested in having a gender-responsive environment? Because globally, there are statistics that some countries lose 3.7 of their GBV, of their GDP, as a result of gender-based violence in the workplace. Bringing it down to company level, there could be situations that if your turnover for the year is, let's say, $100 million, that could have been higher if you had dealt with issues of gender-based violence, increased staff motivation, and dealt with emotional strain of your employees. So yes, it is important that private sector companies really get involved in this. But also, as part of the Sustainable Development Goals, we know that the private sector has a big role to play in championing development, in fostering development, employment creation, and so we can really not afford to say such a big sector that has a role to play, that employs a big number of people, being silent on some of these issues like gender-based violence.
And indeed, how are these private companies pushing back and addressing these cases of gender-based violence, Rebecca?
So what we've seen under the interventions we're having with our different partners, we are seeing over 50 companies, I think getting close to 100, signing up for the gender equality sale. And this is about promoting innovative practices on addressing gender, on promoting gender responsiveness, from promoting women leadership, from dealing with non-sexist communication methods, from dealing with staff development, you know, within the workplaces and how the opportunities are equally distributed among men and women. And we see that those that have undertaken these interventions, they are actually doing well. But also we are doing a lot of capacity building for employees, for senior management, for CEOs to deal with this. And so for us, it's about the collective action, the collective advocacy among private sector entities to promote a positive company culture that promotes safety in the workplace, that says no to gender-based violence. And part of that conversation is really why we're having the private sector dialogue, which is happening tomorrow. The physical event is an invite-only event, but will also be on Zoom virtually. And we would like to invite everyone there who is interested in addressing gender-based violence issues, anyone who cares, anyone who thinks this is a problem, to be able to join us virtually. We'll be able to see different login details on different platforms. And at this dialogue, we'll be having high-level speakers. We are having CEOs of top companies in Uganda.
And of course, this conversation couldn't have come at the right time when, you know, various jurisdictions are grappling with the onset of this COVID-19 pandemic, you know, breaking various economies in that regard. Now we are saying even GBV, gender-based violence, is shedding off 3.7% of these countries' GDPs, and we need to actually address this big problem. But what kind of help do you need from the government moving forward to aid your activities, Rebecca?
So as a private sector, we are working with the government already, with the Ministry of Gender, in addressing this issue of gender-based violence in the workplace. What we ask of government is to ensure that the policy and legal frameworks is responsive. Yes, we are aware that we already have the policy, gender policy in place. We already know we have the Employment Act that talks about protecting the employees from any form of harassment in the workplace. But we are asking for more commitment in terms of district level interventions, because what we see right now is that maybe on a large scale, there are more cases happening in the rural side and the urban side as well. So for the government, it's about enforcement of these laws. And when cases are reported, just like we are saying private sector workplaces, when cases are reported, respond. For government, when these cases come to the different structures, please respond.
And pushing for the sexual offences bill.
Not part of this discussion, but
Indeed.
yes,
All right, that is Rebecca Kukunda Kweshi, is the gender specialist coming in from the Private Sector Foundation, Uganda. And of course, regards to everyone at the PSFU. Of course, look out for that conversation or dialogue tomorrow. Hotel Africana, physically 200 individuals are allowed. Others could actually join in virtually. Minute Maid, ITEL and YouListen app are our sponsors. Let's take a break. We'll be right back.